We are here with Jeffrey Howard. Jeffrey, thank you so much for coming in.
Of course, thank you for having me.
I was thinking a little bit about Chicago before the episode because I know that you're off to University of Chicago next year.
Yes.
And I'd love just to hear. I've got a poem called Chicago that I'll read in a second by Carl Sandburg, which I think you'll like. I don't know if we read it last year or not, but I'd love to hear just about your interest in the University of Chicago and kind of what the whole process was like applying to that school, visiting the school, and just getting familiar with the city of Chicago and the university.
As for the city, the thing that I really like about Chicago as a city is that you can think of LA and New York. People go there because they want to be a star and they want to go make $1 million and be famous. And I think that Chicago is interesting because it feels like the Chicago dream is to go and work a normal middle class job and to like own a normal business. And it feels like it's a city full of real people more than all these like strange dreamers in a lot of ways. So as a city, I think that's something that's really attractive to it, along with the fact like all the amazing culture that comes out of there with the jazz music and famous theater acts, and then also just the amazing political history that goes on there with the political machine, the Democratic Party. I think it's the most interesting city in the world. So as a city, I'm really excited to be there.
Had you been there before you went out to maybe look at University of Chicago?
Yeah, so I went there I think once when I was a lot younger. In freshman year, my older brother goes to Chicago. He's graduating this year, and I took a spring break trip and stayed for a week there at the university. I got some sense of the place there, but that was also the spring break where COVID hit. So it was cut off in a weird way, and there were moments where we didn't know if we were actually going to get back to Baltimore, because if you remember during COVID, there was are they going to cut down interstate travel? Are they going to cut down airplanes? So
Oh yeah.
I was sort of stressed out in some other ways, so I didn't get a really good chance to experience the university.
Was he virtual or was he actually going to class every day?
If you remember, the initial COVID thing was they sent out some materials because they thought something might happen before, but we didn't really understand how ridiculous it would be before the spring break. And by the time we came back, I don't think we came back that year at all. We went straight to virtual. So for him, it was he got off on break and they just never went back to the school. He did another quarter of virtual learning and then
graduated.
He didn't graduate. He took a gap year there.
Oh.
And then from there he went to his junior year. Now he's graduating this year.
Okay, gotcha.
So I'm missing him by 1 year, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's a bummer. So how about the school? How about the university? I didn't really know much about University of Chicago. I was reading on Wikipedia, actually, and I was thinking to myself, Wikipedia, it gets a bad rap, but there's so much information on there that is useful all in one place.
Wikipedia is my number one favorite website ever. I think that there's a very good reason not to cite it in your academic research or when you're writing a paper for school and they try to emphasize that. But I think that's done a lot of harm in making people think that Wikipedia is a bad source to go to. It's a wonderful place to go for information. That's the first place I go whenever I want to learn anything. And you can always jump on other things.
Right, you could spend all day on that thing, just clicking the links and...
Yeah, there's evidence that Wikipedia already is, or at least is growing to be the most credible source of information ever, because sure there's less reviewing as print resources, but more and more that is being outweighed by the recency factor. If someone dies tomorrow, that's not going to be in an encyclopedia, but it will be on Wikipedia.
Yeah.
So more and more Wikipedia is becoming the best place for information in the world, I think.
It used to be, I think this is why it got a bad rap, because you used to be able to go in and make edits. It was owned by the public pretty much, so anybody who's a user of it could go in and change something, and there'd be some random facts that aren't accurate, but I think they probably cracked down on that in some ways. I don't know.
It's so actually, I don't know if you remember, but last year, funny enough, a UChicago alum who was Gilman alum who's actually at UChicago, I think now, came back, and his whole passion was Wikipedia, and he explained about the stuff. It's still fully publicly owned and edited by the people, but they have really robust bots that go around on all the websites, especially the important ones, and make sure that no edit is taken too quickly. If someone goes in and tries to change a ton of stuff, that will immediately switch back. There's a lot of reviewing that happens. I think you're right. Maybe at the beginning it was just less attention on the site so people could get away with more stuff. But especially on things that are reasonably important, it's going to be right almost all the time. Or at least it will have the consensus opinion most
Maybe
of the time.
less technologically advanced now. It's just the AI, the bots, they take care of everything. You don't need to hire somebody to scan all the information to make changes.
But they also have more money to hire people as well. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of oversight on Wikipedia.
But there's always every spring or every month there's a campaign for donations for Wikipedia because it needs people to keep funding it so that it stays alive.
I've done that once or twice.
It's worth it.
I think it's one of the most worthy things I think I would want to help.
I always wonder too about how people make it onto Wikipedia. Like you can. I don't know. Someone is really legit and a professional when their name is. It's almost like the verified on Twitter or Instagram. It's like this person. Okay, it's got a lot of clout or followers if they are listed on Wikipedia.
That's one thing that I don't know if it's credible or not. Because talking about the extreme oversight for checking for false information, I don't know if they would take it off if I put on a Jeffrey Howard Wikipedia, because I don't know if they would care to go. They might have citation needed everywhere or special things that say this has not been vetted, but I don't know if they would take that off. So maybe that's worth thinking about.
Yeah, I wonder if you could do that. Make your own Wikipedia page.
I'll get off this right now and make a Path to Fall podcast Wikipedia page. Start documenting everything that happens.
That'd be great. So let's talk about the school, Chicago, and what attracted you to it in the first place?
So, well, the first thing that attracts me to it was just that my brother was there. So you start thinking about it, and a lot of my thoughts about colleges come through him and how he would talk about it. And what I came to find is that it feels like so many people at Chicago are like my brother and like me, who are just very, very curious for the sake of learning. And it seemed like it's a prestigious school and people will go out there and make a lot of money a lot of the time, but it feels like that's not at all the focus. This is evidenced by the fact they don't have an engineering school, for instance, and I love STEM, but I think that's because they really care to focus on the theoretical nature of it and getting a really good foundational education.
Is it liberal arts?
Yeah, it's sort of liberal arts. I don't know if it's technically liberal arts because I think there are other classifications to call a liberal arts school, quote unquote, but they have a core curriculum, another thing that was really important to me, where they make sure you get a really strong education in the sciences, mathematics, social studies, humanities. They make that's a lot of your education there is the stuff that you have to take.
I was reading about the core curriculum a little bit, and I know that back in the day, I don't know what decade, but it had 15 to 18 classes on that core curriculum list, and one university professor decided to cut it down to 12. I think there may be 12 classes that you need to take now.
18.
It's 18.
I believe so. Well, it depends on whether or not you qualify to skip some language classes, but I did not do great on the AP Latin exam, so I'll be taking 18 core classes there.
But I read that when this university professor decided to cut it down, it was a big deal because that's such a central component to the university is the core curriculum and the well-roundedness of the classes.
Yeah, and I think that that's something that a lot of people, if you're considering the school, should really grapple with, is whether you actually want to go deal with that. If you're someone who wants to go into mathematics, that's all you really care about, it might not be worth going to a place where it'll make you take 9 classes in other subjects. But for me, I do care about getting that full sort of liberal arts feeling of being very well-rounded, and also having all my students around me be well-rounded in the same way. And that's something I'm really excited for, that intellectual community that is made for when everybody has to take these core classes.
Now, why do you think that's so important to you? Because I know you love math. I know you're in advanced math classes here at Gilman, and I think from our conversations before that you've told me that you wanted to pursue math in the future. Why is the core curriculum and the diversity of the courses so important to you?
Well, because I think that in America, a lot college is seen as preparation for a jobs program, sort of, and that's why you go to college. And I think that for a lot of people, that is a smart way of thinking about it if you're not privileged. But I think that for most Gilman students, you're sort of privileged enough to have a more holistic understanding of the college process and the real value of education. And I think that all of that's important for a real value of education, that you need to be able to read, you need to be able to write really well. I think you need to be understand things on a scientific and mathematical level, have a well-rounded understanding of languages, other languages. I think that's important for some hard to pin down like aspect of your soul, and something like that. And that's really important for me. And then even just practically, if you want to go into STEM in any way, you need to be able to communicate your ideas. I don't think there's a single job on the planet where you can just do your little math or physics problems all day and then get paid for it. You have to be able to communicate that to someone else. And I think that's best taught through the humanities and through writing and understanding, text. And I think that's the same way around. You read interpretive English papers and persuasive papers where they make arguments, and that has like a logical backing to it. That I think is best understood through mathematics, where you can say whether it's objectively correct or objectively wrong mathematically, and then you can sort of build these more interpretive, difficult humanities things on top of that. Same with science, If I do a couple trials in a physics lab, I can say the data does support this conclusion or it does not. And then when I move to an English class, that's a harder thing to say, but I still have that basic understanding of how evidence is supposed to help your argument. And I think that getting a well-rounded education is extremely important for anybody who wants to just. I think it's important for anyone who wants to go on to do further things in their life in terms of jobs, but I think it's good for just being like a well put together person in society.
Yeah, I love that. The value of the liberal arts degree. So I was watching a couple of videos of Chicago and just getting a sense of what it looked like because I'd never seen it before. And apart from my Wikipedia plunge, I watched a few videos on YouTube of the campus, and the architecture is beautiful. I mean, it's stunning there.
It's beautiful, and it feels like you're walking around a church everywhere. There's like a famous characterization of the economics department there, which is their most famous department for multiple reasons, and how it's like a church to the free market partially because of how they they structure their academics and their research, but also because it looks like a cathedral when you walk into that department.
Yeah.
I visited over the winter break, and it's stunning to walk around.
The library, the Harper Library, I think it's called, is beautiful.
They have the Mansueto Library is like a weird glass egg.
Yeah.
You can sit in, and when it snows, you can like see the snow falling off the side. Just a beautiful place to be.
I thought it was in the center city of Chicago, but it's a little bit removed.
No, it's in Hyde Park near the south side.
Okay.
I think that's something that I'm very privileged to never really understand what it's like to live in like an environment that isn't beautiful. I think because I grew around this area. Gilman is a stunning campus.
Yep.
Walking around all these trees, all this greenery everywhere, and then I'm gonna go over there. It's also stunning. So yeah, something that I don't think I'll ever have to deal with is like a place that's just not beautiful. And I think that's something that we all take for granted at Gilman, for sure.
Yeah, that's very true. Do you live pretty close by? Did you grow up kind of in Roland Park area, or where'd you grow up?
Last 7 years I've lived in the Roland Park area. I lived in Timonium for a while. That was more like basic suburbia. Now, I mean, I still live in like a suburb, but it feels more connected. I can walk to things now. Walk to Gilman, walk to Eddie's.
So tell me a little bit about kind of your upbringing. I know you have a couple brothers, right? What's your family life like? What's it like growing up with a couple brothers and boys in the family?
It's kind of hard to explain because it's just like a fact of life for me. I don't understand how people can like grow up as like a single child with like just you and your parents in the house. My parents worked for a lot of my life, so a lot of my life was my older brother taking care of me. And even now when they're back all together, we go on long walks from here to near the Homewood campus, JHU, just like talking and arguing and bickering like brothers do. But it's wonderful, yeah.
That's great.
And I spent 14 years at Gilman, so that's definitely a huge part of my.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So you came in what, pre-K or?
No, I came in kindergarten, and they had a pre-first program where you go to pre-first grade before first grade. So
you're a 14-year man.
Yeah, I'm the first generation of 14-year men. There's a couple other in our class.
Wow. So are you sad to leave? Are you excited? Like what's kind of your mindset here right in the middle of the last year at Gilman?
It's hard not to be really excited. I'm really excited to go to college. No matter what college I was going to, I think that I was just really excited to move on to more independent academics, more independence in how I live. But it's also really hard not to feel melancholic walking around, like I said, the beautiful campus, or talking to teachers that have been around me for a long time, friends I've had for 12 years now. So
yeah. Yeah. And your brother's going to be a senior next year, right? Your younger brother.
Yes, Jamie is a senior.
Yeah, Jamie. We're going up to the Model UN conference in a couple of weeks with him leading the charge, which
Really?
I'm happy about because he and Zach Minkin and CeeLo Kim do a great job. I mean, Sheilo Kim, they do a great job running the show in there.
Yeah.
But
I don't understand that kid, Jamie. He does so many things and runs so many things. Hit that in mock trial and student government. I don't think I could deal with it. I think I would pass out.
Yeah, it's a lot for sure. But
definitely.
And I know you're taking a class through Hopkins, right?
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me a little bit about that class and what that's all about?
So first semester I took a class called Introduction to Proofs, which is I started thinking about it more in general. Most introduction to proof class will be like an introduction to math, because when you go study pure mathematics in college, it's not about computation and finding, what is the area under the curve or whatever. It's about understanding logic and being able to make logical conclusions from certain axioms. And that's sort of what this class taught. It also taught in a very strange way. Something that I think about is, when we think about how we digitize music and we turn all these records into to our computers, it doesn't really mean anything if we have a bunch of ones and zeros that we know is the music, or we have like a bunch of waveforms that is the music. What matters is that we can play the music back, on a phone that someone may be listening to this podcast on. And I sort of think of that how this class is going is that you can scan all these math books to just like have that information somewhere, but I think computers have the capabilities to actually understand the theorems for what they mean and understand these connections between them and tell the computers themselves can make these logical steps that we do when we do a math problem. And that's sort of what this class is about. Is there's a computer program called Lean, and you describe a math problem in there, and you can go through each one where you take each logical step and apply theorems, and at the end it tells you if your theorem is correct. And that's sort of how this class went, and I think it was a very interesting way. Some ways it's a little disappointing because I wanted to get first experience with what it's like to take a math class at a university, and this is a very strange math class. And another way, it's a very good thing that happened, because as far as I can tell, this is the only class like it in the world. There's no other classes that teach proofs and logic through this lens. And
so is it strange because you're utilizing the computer for most of it?
Yeah, most problems you're given like, here's a theorem and prove it, and you have to write it out with your hand. You have to give explanations that make sense. This class was just, you have to, it feels less like math, feels more like playing a video game where you're trying to manipulate the answer until it says theorem proved. And it feels a little disconnected from mathematics, but it's also, very interesting, understanding how what we understand in our heads very intuitively has to be translated into a computer for it to understand it. There's a lot of things that we take for granted in our head that a computer needs to be spelled out very explicitly.
Yeah, I remember I took computer science my sophomore year in college, and this is the first time I had any experience. I don't know, have you taken computer science?
No, I've done a lot of coding, but I never took like comp sci.
Well, I took this class. It's called CS 50, Computer Science 50, and it's the basic beginner class. And it's the largest course at Harvard. It was when I was there, and it would fill up the entire, really the dining hall, but the lecture hall attached to the dining hall with people. It was massive, and it got so big that they had to put it online. So you just watch the lectures and do the P set on your own. But the first day, the professor, I forget his name, but he was more of a theatrical, like it was a presentation, and it was supposed to get you engaged and excited, and they'd shoot out T-shirts into the crowd. It was like a big deal. And he did some exercise where he tried to program a human being to do exactly what you would do with a computer. So it was like trying to get you to build a sandwich, and you have to tell you every single direction and pick your right hand up. Oh no, you didn't tell this person to breathe, right? They need oxygen to breathe. And then pick up the slice of bologna. Well, you didn't tell like all those little intricate
Yeah.
details you take for granted that you actually need to input into a computer to get it to run.
Mrs. Barger in the lower school in first grade did that exact demo. And the kids told her, spread the peanut butter on the bread. And then she stuck her entire hand into the jar of peanut butter and started spreading her hand
Yeah.
all peanut butter. That's the idea, yeah, is that you need to be really explicit and careful when you're talking to computers because, they can do amazing things, but they can't understand some very intuitive things that humans do. And a lot of, like, the future of computing, as I see it with machine learning and deep learning, is about taking a computer and making it more human and building a pseudo brain within a computer that understands how to train from data and how to take stimulus and get an answer from it.
So machine learning, I have a sense of what that is, but deep learning, I don't know how often I've heard that term before.
Yeah, I honestly don't know the difference either.
It's just teaching a computer how to do things that humans can do.
So my understanding of machine learning is that we have like a neural network, and what we can do is we can input data and get an answer from it. So let's say we input a bunch of pixels that draws the number 7, and then the computer has to tell us what number was drawn here, and it'll try to guess 7. If it guesses 6, we know it's wrong. And what we can do is we can sort of look back at the steps it took to guess that it was 6, and then tweak them slowly to say this is what you should have done to get to 7, at least a little bit more. And over thousands and thousands and thousands of examples and data sets of getting it wrong, maybe getting it right, getting rewarded for it, it'll eventually come to a situation where it will understand whether it's a 6 or 7 or 1 or whatever. And I think that it's interesting because that's sort of how humans learn, is that you see enough ones, you start to understand and see that symbol yourself.
Deep memory.
Yeah. It's not, what you were doing in your CS50 class, I'm guessing, is very like imperative problem solving. You have some problem, count to 100, and you tell the computer, okay, take number 1 and add it once, and then keep going to get to 100. That's very like explicit way of explaining to the computer how you want it to do something. And it's not the weird world of machine learning where we have a goal and we have examples of how of what you're trying to get to, and we tell the computer to figure out itself.
Makes sense. Yeah, and I've been thinking a lot of this recently with the ChatGPT emergence. I've been toying around with that thing a little bit, and in some ways I understand how it works, not completely, but I understand that it's just scanning the entire web or a snapshot of the web to derive information and put it together in a certain way. But there's an element of creativity, and at least creativity that can fool people. It's not, I would say, organic creativity, but I told it to write. I was trying to show my friend who's a 76ers fan, and he was going to the Sixers basketball game later that night. I was like, watch this. I'll tell this ChatGPT to write a sonnet about the starting five of the 76ers, and it writes a sonnet about the 76ers.
And that's tough, like what you said about creativity philosophically. Like, what do we consider creative? If it did just, take examples of sonnets and then take, buzzwords of the 76ers and put them in there, I don't know, maybe you wouldn't consider that creative, but that might be similar to how a human would try to attack that problem. And there is problems of what's called overtraining, where we run that data through so many times that, like, if I ask it a question, it'll basically just print out word for word what the Wikipedia article had said. But I do think that for most things the ChatGPT does that I've seen, you can give it things that there's no way there's ever been recreated on the internet, Write me a play that described my second period math class, except everyone has a British accent,
It will do that.
It will do that, and I don't think anyone's ever, done that game before. And that's, the question, is that creative? Do we consider that creative? If it is just merging everything, if it's merging a ton of other examples on the internet together to create one thing.
But it does it so fast, way faster than a human could ever do it, which is the scary part of it.
That's a lot. Yeah, that's a scary part of it too. And exactly how much different are we from the computer at that point? Because if you ask me to do that, I'm gonna think back to what I remember from Shakespeare and try to copy that and then add in buzzwords. It might be very similar to how the computer works. So, yeah, it's tough.
I asked my class this not too long ago just to see what the response was, and this was before ChatGPT, but it's even more relevant now with this whole coming out and all the conversations about a lot of jobs have to do with like creating emails that a ChatGPT could do in 0.5 seconds. It's like even assigning essays, I'm thinking to myself, like, I teach my classes how to write 5-paragraph essay and what a topic sentence is and how to integrate a quotation and defend a thesis statement. And these things do it so fast that it just makes you think, well, like why teach that to someone if a computer can do it almost? Mm-hmm. And so I asked my class the other day, I was like, if you guys read a beautiful poem or a beautiful short story and you found out later that a computer had written it, how would you feel about it? And I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
I think in the retrospect, it would make me like it less. I think that like the enjoyment that I get a lot from poetry is imagining, how a human expressed those thoughts in a lot of ways. And I think that just the knowledge that it was that was a computer would ruin that a little bit for me.
It was interesting
if you never told me, I think I probably would keep going like in the poem the same way.
Right, because you didn't know. I think some of my students in the class said I'd be amazed and I'd be so impressed, and I think it's super cool, which I'm not going to lie, like I've seen some of the artificial intelligence art on Twitter of just paintings and pieces of art that the computer generates, and it's pretty amazing. I mean, I am floored by it, but there is a sense that it's like a human didn't do that, so I'm not as impressed by it, but I am impressed and confused about how computers can make that.
Mm-hmm. Something you're talking about with, replacing jobs, I think is interesting, is that, we were, a lot of people were worried about their jobs being misplaced of, self-driving cars might take over trucking or even like the art stuff. And I think there was a sense for like computer scientists that they were like, felt really, comfortable that like, oh, we're the ones creating this stuff, we'll be okay. Mm-hmm. And then ChatGPT comes out and I can tell ChatGPT to, write a program to analyze this data for me, and it will write it for me. And, I think that realizing that even the stuff that goes into ChatGPT can be less, can be more procedural and more replicable than we thought too. So there's a lot of like areas that are unexpected that it can take over. One thing that I think there is still room for is that a downside in my eyes, and why I don't know if I will go into machine learning, because this is something that I don't love, is that when I feed that data to that neural network and it slowly learns how to get those answers over time, I don't really know why. There's no like, it never sits down and explains to me like, oh, it looked at this part of the picture to figure out that was a 3 and not a 4. And I think that over time, that will be more and more of like the human's part in the process, is that it can give us answers, but we don't know why, and we want to figure out why. And that'll be like the job of humans to come in and try to interpret the data and figure that out, I think.
Mm-hmm. Now, do you think you'll want to take some computer science classes next year?
Definitely. I think that at U Chicago, there's a lot of cross-listing between the math department and the computer science department, and if I can get enough of those like credits to double count, I might go for a double major, because it's really that computers, the type of math that I really like, called like discrete math, where when you're in calculus, you deal with these smooth functions, you deal with limits where you can get infinitely close to zero without quite being there and such. That's cool, but I like thinking about whole numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, the natural numbers, and that's far closer to how a computer thinks. If you look into the hardware of a computer, it sees data as either a 1 or a 0. It doesn't really think about gradients between 1 and 0, at least for classical, like non-quantum computers. That gets weird. But and that there's a lot of interesting math to apply there. And I think I see theoretical computer science of like thinking about how algorithms can be created as a subfield of math that I'm very interested in. And there's a class at Gilman called combinatorics, which is taught by Miss Vasquez. Mm-hmm. And me and Kate Schnee from our PCS are the only 2 students in that class. I want to take a moment to shout out that class. I think that every junior who is interested in computer science or math should sign up for that class, because it's a wonderful experience.
So what do you guys do in a 2-person class?
We just really do problems. Like we come in and we've read the chapter, and she expects us to have understood the material to some degree, and then she gives us problems to do. And then she has problem sets where she says, do 6 problems from the chapter, and come in and we'll talk about those problems after you finish them. And it's just a very a personalized way of learning where, here's the funny thing that happened recently is that I was in English class, and he was creating groups for a film project where he said, everyone send me two people that you want to work with and one person you'd rather not work with. And I was thinking like, oh, how would you do that in a computer? Like, how would you make a computer figure out the best grouping such that everyone's the most happy with all the people they want to be and not with people they don't want to be? And I just emailed with Vasquez, like, do you think, how would you do this? And it had a lot to do with what was happening in our class. We're doing stuff called graph theory, which is dealing with these objects where you think about a bunch of points on a graph, maybe students, and then a bunch of edges that connect these people, like, oh, this student Jeffrey wants to be with student James or something like that. And she was just like, okay, we'll try that. And I went in the class next day and we just talked about that problem all class. And then the work that we're doing in the future is like just building this algorithm. And we're actually going to give it to Mr. Hastings to use later in class. So
that's cool.
That sort of like personalized, it's very exciting because I think that in college you get opportunities to do that. If you get really deep into your major, you know, if I take enough math classes, I'll be able to go to these seminar classes where I can directed read and do what I want to do and learn what I want to learn. And then the professor will guide me in some ways. But that kind of happens at the end of your undergraduate career. And I'm sort of getting a mini chance to do that in high school already.
I love that. I mean, I was never a huge math person because I think when I was in high school, I didn't see where it would take me or why I should be interested in it. I don't know. Maybe it was teachers I had or just naturally I was way more attracted to English. Like I always loved English, but the cool thing I think is using math and using equations to generate real world solutions. And maybe that's what I didn't see when I was in high school. But
I wouldn't feel that, I wouldn't be just regret that if I were you, because for me I see it the very opposite way. I really like math for the problems and I enjoy the problems. And there's a quote by this guy Cornell Steven Strogatz, who I love, and he says that as an applied mathematician, he's supposed to talk about all the amazing benefits for the real world and medicine and all that, but he really sees the real world as a motivation for fun math problems. That's how I thought that, truly, I love Mr. Hastings. I don't think I would be, I'm not doing all this work for like the humanitarian effort to make sure that he can organize his class better. I'm doing it because I really like the problem.
Right.
So,
yeah, that makes sense.
Some people are motivated by, the application and the ways you can, build real world things out of it. But I love it because the real world can, everywhere around me, there's some
just
fun
the process of solving equations. Yeah. Well, my friend Lauren G, who I went to college with, I went on a walk with her over Thanksgiving break or the holiday break. And she lives out in San Francisco, and she has a boyfriend who I actually have known since my freshman year of college. And that's what's kind of cool. We could talk about that too, is how a lot of people that you'll meet next year, you'll be friends with for a while. It's the best part of freshman year, I think. It's because it's all new people, and everyone you sit down with on a given day could be people you know for the rest of your life, which I love about freshman year. But this guy is into machine learning, and he does all that. And she was telling me how he gifted her for Christmas a bot that will help her send out all of her emails that she needs to do, sort of like ChatGPT, but specifically tailored to her job. And I just thought that was fascinating, a real world application of machine learning.
That's really cool.
But yeah, that's the practical ways that math and machine learning and all of this is used. But
for me, that's not what I'm interested in, but I understand that, the government's giving out grants for this research not because they want to let Jeffrey play with some puzzles. It's because they want something out of it, right? Yeah. So
when you, I guess, want to have fun with equations, do you just go online to find equations, or like what is your process? And I guess it's your hobby too. Like if you're sitting around on a Saturday, how do you entertain yourself with math?
Textbooks are fun in my eyes. The textbooks for this Common Course class we're doing, which is like what the class is based on, I bring that most places in my backpack. It's always there because I can usually go there and there's fun problems in the back of that. I think YouTube is a really nice resource. There's a couple people, 3 Blue 1 Brown is one pretty popular YouTube channel that does math explanations, and those are videos I would recommend to anyone, math or not, because even if you don't intrinsically love the math, like the animations are beautiful and what he creates out of it is amazing. There are more or less known channels, like a guy named Michael Penn, who just sits at a blackboard and does number theory problems. That guy's really fun. This guy named Black Pen, Red Pen, who's just another guy who sits at a board and does problems.
I've heard that. Yep.
He'll post a video every year that's like, 10 hours of integrals. We're just gonna sit and do a godly amount of math on a board. So a lot of times it's YouTube, but textbooks are, if you can get your hand on a nice textbook, that's what I like to do too. Yeah.
I love that. I love that. So do you see yourself being a professor someday, or where do you? I know it's a hard question because you're just entering college, but what would be the dream for you?
I think that's the dream for me right now. Very tentative on whether there's a lot of things that you sacrifice by going for that route in terms of like money and job security, but right now in my life it feels like it's a combination of things that I really, really love, where you can engage in a really deep level on new problems that no one's ever thought before, while also being able to teach other people and build those relationships, while also like engaging in the community that is your university and your department. I think that's my dream right now. I think I'm doing my senior encounter with my professor at Hopkins, and I'm going to get a better idea from there on what his life is like. He's a postdoc, so it's a bit different. He's not like a full tenure, but...
Do you have to go to Hopkins for that class, or is it virtual?
I leave lunch 3 days a week.
Wow.
When it's in session. Not right now. Actually, yeah, technically, if class is in session right now at Hopkins, I would not be here. I would be over there right now.
Huh.
But that class ended, and I'm waiting till the end of the month to start a linear algebra over there.
What was that like, just leaving campus and going to university?
It's kind of cool in some ways. You feel independent, and
you get a taste of what college is like.
Yeah, it's not like I'm going and taking class a bunch of high schoolers. There were 6 people in my class, and all other 5 of them were undergraduates. It wasn't even freshmen. I think they were mostly juniors and seniors. So you really get a feeling of what a real college class is like, especially at a school that is not known for being easy.
Right. Yeah.
I would say in some ways it's definitely not like in terms of people going into their senior year and thinking about trying for this program. I would not recommend it for anyone except for people who like math for the sake of math, because it's a very legitimate commitment. Hopkins is a very tough school, on top of the fact that they expect that you take like 5 classes. So if you're taking 6 classes and one of those Hopkins class, that's more than they would even expect of you. And you get in some ways disconnected from the Gilman community in a way that is I don't like. For a lot of people, it probably sounds like a dream to skip assembly a lot, but I do miss being up to date on everything that everyone's doing. I usually, when I'm here, I go to the Science Help Center and I tutor kids in physics, and I like that a lot. And I just haven't had nearly enough time to do that this year. So
makes sense.
There's pros and cons. I would only consider it if you really like math for the sake of math. That's what I tell people.
What would your advice be for juniors? So I teach juniors, and I'm sure the college application process is coming up for them. I guess preliminarily, like applications or just thinking about college and tours, I guess, in the spring semester and over the summer. For someone who just got out of the college process and is all settled and knows where you're going, if you could go back to this time junior year, what would you tell everyone?
I would say the most important thing is to get your priorities straight and have a really serious conversation with yourself about what it is you want out of college. Because once you list down these are the really, really important things for me, you'll find that most universities fulfill those requirements. There's a lot of stress that comes about it, but I think that for me, being able to visualize my an entire experience at university that was wonderful at even my safety schools, that was very important for me. I said that I wanted to take difficult classes. I wanted opportunities to try undergraduate research, and those are the deal breakers for me. And I think that along with social stuff, but I think that any college is going to have people that you're going to have great time with, pretty much no matter what. And I found that there are so many schools. It's not just the top 20 schools that fulfill those criteria.
Now, what are really the main stressors in this process? And I guess what's a good way for students to handle those stressors?
So I think that the biggest stressor is something that I think what I was just talking about, the priorities, is the feeling that if you don't get in, then you've set yourself up for a bad time in a lot of ways. I think that's the biggest thing, is just this feeling of, putting all this weight onto college, and, feeling like if that doesn't work out for you, then you're going to be in, your life is going to be like terrible or something. It's just not true. I think that's an enormous stressor to get off. Another thing is just getting used to writing essays. In my junior year, I started writing college essays in your class, but even also because you assigned, some personal essays, but also before that even. And I don't think I used a single one that I wrote before my senior year, but I got very used to just writing and talking about my life. And that's, in terms of the work, that's where a lot of the college stuff comes around.
Yeah, I don't realize that when I teach personal essay writing, but for a lot of students, that's the first time you've really ever written about yourself. So I think it is important for, I guess, priming you for the next year, or at least thinking about yourself a little bit more and what you want and what your goals are. And
if you really want to make sure you're super set, it's probably best to just start keeping a journal and writing every night. I started doing that last week, and it's going well. That's probably the best thing to get practice about, writing about your life and understanding yourself and putting that into words.
I like that.
Which is where a lot of the stress comes from. And I'll be honest, I was rewarded for some very bad behavior on the winter break, because I had a lot of essays to write in a very short period of time if I didn't get into school. And that's a lot of where the stress came for me in a break. And I definitely would not, even...
So if you didn't get into Chicago, you would have had a lot of stuff.
A huge 9-day turnaround there, because they were also released really late.
Yeah.
And even knowing that I got in, I wish that I had written those essays, because that winter break was very stressful. Even, if I had written those, knowing now that I got in, I still would have written those essays, because it made my entire break a lot worse before I got in. So just stay on top of your stuff and be really honest about what your expectations and where you think you're going to go in life.
Did you visit a lot of schools?
No, not really. Not really. I didn't really visit many schools, but that's a me thing. I think a lot of people. I talked a little bit earlier about, I'm lucky that I'm going to stay on a beautiful campus, but that wasn't really high on my priorities list. I would have taken a school with better academics immediately over a school that was prettier, but I think there are a lot of people that do have those priorities. For me, it just didn't feel like walking around a campus really gave me much impression of what the university was like. So pretty soon I noticed that
What do you think does? Going on the website or talking to people that go there already?
Talking to people that go there already, going on the website, trying to, honestly, it's just very, very tough. But there are resources online that talk about that sort of thing. I would, look at the departments I care about and read about what they're doing in their research, what their focus is. I would read about how they deal with student life.
Professors.
Yeah, professors, definitely. You can email professors, honestly. Try to be respectful and understand if they don't get back to you. But, I mean, these emails are public. You can send a professor an email and ask them questions.
You can find anyone's name online. Yeah,
I did that a couple times. Yeah, and I got emails back, and they were wonderful people.
Right. Yeah, that's smart. Gives you a sense of who you're going to be working with or in their class next year.
Yeah, and a lot of schools post things on YouTube, lectures and stuff. I watched a lot of lectures from Chicago going in, and that made me excited to be wow, these are the people that are there. I'm very excited to meet these people. Yeah.
Cool. So what questions, you had a little book of questions. I'm curious about this little black book that you have.
Everyone knows that I'm the #1 Path to Follow podcast fan, so I thought it would take a minute to ask you some questions about the Path to Follow podcast. Yeah. So do you have a favorite episode? And if you don't want to choose favorites, just one that you come back to and think about a lot.
Ooh, that's a good question. I don't know if I have a favorite episode. They've all been so different. I think the first episode was awesome with Brian Ledyard, because I didn't know what I was doing. We were getting our feet wet here. I just asked Cesare if he wanted to start a podcast. It was middle of COVID, really, and there wasn't much going on at school. So that's definitely one of my favorite ones. The most viewed one is with a professor at University of Pennsylvania named Jonathan Zimmerman, who was my professor. I have a great relationship with him, and he wrote a book about free speech that I was curious about, because he has great opinions, and opinions that are not always agreed with widely, but ones I find fascinating. So he's a lively character, and it was fun talking to him over Zoom. I don't love the Zoom podcasts because it's a little bit harder. You can't feel the person's energy like you can in person.
I have to agree with you on that one. That Zoom podcasts were a bit of a turnoff for me when I would try to. I think you can also tell the audio is a bit different too.
Yeah, and there's some lag sometimes. It's just the way it is. But I'm trying to think who else. It was cool talking to Coach Harbaugh a little bit. I like that. But really, the teachers and the coaches and the faculty members and the staff members at Gilman, I mean, I love talking to the students. I love talking to alums that come back, but it's cool to hear pretty similar answers about what Gilman means to people, and that's what I've liked. I've liked just kind of getting into the minds of all of the members of the community here. So,
my favorite podcast is Mr. Slutkin.
Yeah.
Just talking about Lincoln for like 40 minutes was wonderful.
It's amazing.
That was
right?
a great podcast.
And I didn't really know him that well when I had him on there because we had just started sharing an office together, and he's got a statue of Lincoln and he's reading Lincoln all the time, and I have a sense that he loves this guy. But when he started quoting every speech, I didn't know what to do with it. So I was like, wow, that's a lot to digest. That's amazing that you memorized that.
Out of nowhere, starts quoting the eulogy for Henry Clay.
Yeah.
It was wonderful, yeah.
It was cool. I learned a lot.
I haven't talked to him much, so you might be surprised to hear this, but like I was listening to it, I was like, dang, I'm really sad I never, he came after I was like a sophomore. I never got to take a class from this guy. So
yeah, he has professor vibes.
Yes,
he knows his stuff very, very well. It's impressive. Do you have a favorite episode?
That Mr. Slutkin.
Slutkin?
Yeah, that's what I was talking about.
Oh, great.
I also like Mr. Goulin's episode.
Yeah.
A bit.
Yeah.
That was a good one.
Cool.
Okay.
So do you listen to them or do you watch them?
I listen to them.
Yeah.
Because I just listen to a lot of podcasts.
Yeah.
That's
cool.
I watched the one with Mr. White. That was a good one.
Yeah.
Because I remember I emailed you, like, you need to get Mr. White on the podcast. And then you emailed me the YouTube link before anything else. So I clicked that and watched it immediately.
Do you have any recommendations of guests that we have not had on that we should get on?
Okay. So one thing is I like it when you bring on non-Gilman people too. I don't know how like other people who listen to podcasts feel about it, but I think it's really interesting to hear from outside the community too. Think about teachers that I like. I think Mr. Schroeder from the lower school, wonderful person.
Need to get him on.
Mr. Downs from the middle school teaches history. You should get him on. You need to get Miss Vasquez on for sure.
Yeah,
she is the reason I was on this. I mentioned that I wanted to be on the podcast and
that is true.
In combinatorics class, and then she built an entire harassment campaign to talk to you any and everywhere to get me on the podcast. So I definitely need to say that you need to get her on. Yeah.
Love that. Great. We will.
Yes.
Got some work to do. We're on episode 101 right here. So
I do like that I'm that number too.
Yeah. Good.
Okay. This is a question. So you are not like, you didn't graduate from Gilman and you came here from the Penn Fellow program, right? What like about Gilman made you just like set up shop? Because like when I came into Gilman, I was like, this guy has to have been like a Gilman alum whose like family has been to Gilman for 6 generations, the way that he like created a whole podcast about the place.
Right.
What do you think about here is just like that enticing for you?
That's a good question. The first time I came here, and I was really shooting for boarding schools, surprisingly, which now I'm like, why would I work at a boarding school when I'm in my mid-20s, because it's so removed from cities and people and interactions. I did an internship at Choate Rosemary Hall in Connecticut, and I loved teaching, and I loved just the atmosphere of an independent school. So that's what I wanted. I wanted something like Choate, because that was just an incredible experience for me. And I found out about the Penn Fellowship. That was a great opportunity, 2 years, master's degree in education. But when I first came to Gilman, I had always known about Gilman through lacrosse. Like I played with guys that went to Gilman. It's got a great reputation in the lacrosse world. It's like, this is the mecca for lacrosse here. And so that enticed me. But I didn't really care that much about lacrosse, to be honest. I mean, I was kind of burnt out after 4 years of college lacrosse. I'd love to, help out with lacrosse. I love giving lessons to kids, but I think what really did it was the combination of all these things together. I could teach English, I could do a master's degree, I could coach some lacrosse. And also I was walking the hallways and I saw all the artwork hanging up, and art has always been something that I love, and the talent of Gilman artists, and just seeing all the paintings on the hallway, I was like, this place like really appreciates art and painting, and then I met Carl Connolly, and I was like, wow, I like the well-roundedness of Gilman, and that was really the reason that I wanted to come here, is the combination of all those things. That's a good question.
Great. Well, the question was more, once you got here, what made you like you're like a Gilman man now. That's how I see you, okay? But you did not go here for school, and it's just such a, like, when I heard that it was really a shock for me. Like, what do you think made you so attached once you got here?
I think just the combination of everything, and there was nothing wrong in those first 2 years. I had no complaints. I wasn't huge on the city. I was like, Baltimore, like, there are different places I could live, but now I love it. There's nothing to really gripe about. I have no qualms.
Okay.
So there would be no reason for me to really leave, if I can do all these different things. I could come into the podcast studio, coach lacrosse. I could go into the art room and paint. Like, it's very rare that you have all these different places in your back pocket, almost in your backyard.
Okay. So you have your guests bring a book for each podcast. If you had to bring a book, what would it be?
Oh, that's a really good question. Wow. I like that. Well, I brought a book today that you actually gave me.
That one doesn't
Selected
count.
Poems by Gwendolyn Brooks, which I've really been enjoying reading. I always have trouble with the question, like, what's your favorite book? Because that's what people ask me all the time as an English teacher, English major, what's your favorite book? And I usually fall back on the book that I'm reading, because I don't really have a favorite book. I like whatever is in my hands at a certain time. And there are books that I return to a lot. The books that I teach, The Great Gatsby, for one, it's the book I've read the most. And I've read that like 15 times or something crazy.
Do you still enjoy it, or is it a little bit?
I still enjoy it. I still notice things about it that I didn't, ever before. And that's why I like teaching it, is people point things out to me that I'd never seen before. But I think I would bring The Scarlet Letter, because it's my favorite book of all time. I read it when I was a sophomore in high school. I think it's an incredible story, but there's a lot of real life application to it and a lot to consider in 2023. In terms of forgiveness, grace, I think cancel culture is an interesting concept and idea to talk about today, because I have Twitter and I see a lot of that going on in the world. And I think that story is a story about cancel culture in some ways. So
that's a big conversation at Chicago right now, because they sort of made a reputation for being a very pro-free speech school. Originally it was about McCarthyism, and it was a really famous walk of Chicago students to the town hall to protest these anti-free speech laws. But that's feeling I think for a lot of people that's feeling more and more outdated these days, as everything's moving in that direction.
Yeah,
which is interesting. I think
it's very interesting. I mean, it's an important conversation to have in the world today, and especially with my students. So I didn't teach Scarlet Letter this year, but I'm going to next year, because I think that was a mistake.
You're missing it right now.
For sure, for sure. How about you? What book did you bring in? What is this?
I brought in Watchmen. This is it's a graphic novel by Alan Moore. It's like I didn't know I have to lift it up to the camera.
There you go.
There you go. It's a beautiful cover. There you go. And it's sort of, I feel like all the time now there's a new, superheroes have blown up, and there's a new superhero thing every week. It's like, oh, it's the dark take on superheroes. Oh, here's a superhero, but everyone's kind of mean stuff. I think it's a little boring now, but this is sort of like the original, the guy who did it first, and sort of just, reckoning with, we have all these, superhero stories, people like Batman and Superman, and how these people actually act in the real world. If you took someone like Batman who, dressed up at night and fought crime, he probably wouldn't be, some playboy billionaire. He's more akin to in this book, it's someone who walks around the street and points, holds a sign that says the end is nigh. Or if you have a Superman type character who's all powerful, he probably would have a really hard time relating with humanity, and they have a character like that in this book. I was talking with Cesare before the podcast, very interestingly. in the movie of Watchmen, the guy who plays Dr. Manhattan is actually, or the body double from Manhattan who does the physique, because he's like a blue guy who floats around and he's naked, and it's very like famous imagery. That's actually a Gilman alum, apparently.
Oh yeah.
A guy named Greg Plitt, I think. He died recently, but apparently it's just such a coincidence I brought it in, and in the movie it's a Gilman guy.
I did not know that. And that movie didn't come out too long ago, right?
I want to say it was early 2010s.
Okay.
So yeah, not too long ago. I think it's a fine movie. I don't think it quite is as good as the book. But the thing I like most about the book is it sort of like deconstructs this idea of like, you have a lot of these movies and superheroes where it's like these singular like super beings who are fighting for their philosophy on the world, and like these specific people, what they do is like what determines how the world moves forward, and their like personal quirks and philosophies. And I think it sort of like critiques that of like, you know, who are these people to make these huge decisions over the world, and exploring, even if there's good intentions, where can they go wrong, and really diving into the like philosophy of each character, people who are extremely utilitarian and how they are try to solve the world's ills, people who are very, you know, do not believe that the ends justify the means, that you need to, you know, be right in each step of the way.
And do you like the graphic novel, I guess, construction of this genre?
I do like this. It's a very wordy graphic novel at the end of the day. A lot of them have, this is heavier on the text, and between each chapter they have little like world building interludes. There's they'll have like a full newspaper of, it's set in the 60s, like they'll have a full newspaper of, you know, what's happening in Vietnam to like build out the world, or they'll have in between they'll have a little blurb of, you know, an encyclopedia entry about owls or something like that, and just like little things to make you feel like you're living in this world of Watchmen. Yeah,
that's cool. Yeah, I need to get into graphic novels a little bit more. I know Persepolis is the kind of the big one that you read in school, which I've read, but I was reading Mouse, which is another one, which is fascinating.
Yeah, great one.
Yeah, cool. Well, thank you for bringing that in. Other questions?
I do have, I think, 2 more questions. So is there, I'm sure you get this, but is there anyone you still want to have on the podcast? You can answer this Gilman, non-Gilman, realistic, unrealistic, however you want.
Anyone that I still want to have on that I haven't yet? Well, I've been trying to get Bart Griffith on. I don't know if you knew Mr. Griffith. He was at Gilman.
I think I'm actually family friends with him, yeah.
A couple of years ago, and he left, and he's the head of school at Shadyside Academy in Pittsburgh. So we've been trying to get him on. I love that guy. He's a big reason that I came to Gilman, because of my relationship with him right from the bat. So I think it'll be cool to talk to him again. Anyone else I want to get on? I had Mr. Smythe on a couple days ago for episode 100, and I want to talk to some more heads of schools and some administrators at different schools around the country, which we're going to have to record on Zoom, but I think it will still be interesting to get some perspectives of other schools and what other schools are doing, and some of the problems and things that are going on in their schools that they're working on. So yeah, that's really where I'm at right now. I'm just kind of one at a time, but
I understand that if you did have the power to raise from someone from the dead, you probably wouldn't use it to film a podcast, but if you could interview anyone who's not alive anymore, who would it be?
Oh, wow. Anyone.
Anyone. That's why I said unrealistic. You can...
that's such a good question.
Sky's the limit.
Man, you came prepared. Let's see. I'd love to, keeping it Gilman-centric for right now, because there's so many people outside of Gilman just generally that I'd love to talk to. But Gilman, I would love to talk to people that were here in the early days of the school, when it first started. But more broadly speaking, I would love to talk to... that's so good.
If you don't have an answer, that's fine.
Yeah, but it bugs me because it's almost like the what's your favorite book question. You know, it's like a million books pop into my head. And I'm like, and I just don't know what to say. But
can I say who I thought you were going to say?
Who's that?
Mr. Finney.
Mr. Finney.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, for sure. Path to Follow.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, him for sure. I'd love to talk to him and get to know him, because all you really know about him is like the stories and the legends and how everyone I've ever talked to has said great things about that guy. And there are very few people in the world where that's the case. You know, it's always like there's always some story that
It's not just people who knew him say is great. It feels like anybody who went here at the time knew him also.
Yeah.
Like anybody who was in proximity to him has a story about him, not just, people who, want to step out and say there's a good story. Like I asked my dad and he was like, oh yeah, there's this in story about Eddie Finney.
Everyone knows him and everyone has good things to say about him. And I think when you watch that documentary, Path to Follow, the original, you get that sense too, that he really was a man of his word and person who talked about integrity, but also lived integrity. And I just think that's so cool and so rare,
My favorite story about him was a middle school teacher. I don't remember who it was, but they played a prank on him by putting a piece of trash outside with a string attached, and they dragged it around like halfway around campus, pulling him along, and he followed it the whole way. Because that's what he does. Is he tries to make the world a better place.
First class citizen picks up trash.
Citizen. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, great question, and Mr. Finney is a good one.
One last question about the future of the podcast. Where do you see the podcast going? If you could change it, move it in any other direction, what would it be? Do you see an end to the podcast in any way, or do you just plan on going on the same way you've been going?
I don't know. I really take it week by week almost, because I just like talking to people and learning more. That's probably why I'm a teacher and why I'm at Gilman. Back to your original question, is that I'm very curious, always have been, and I just like learning a lot. So talking to people fills that void for me, and well, a lot of things do, but specifically talking to people on a deep level, like not just conversation, not small talk, but actually diving into the details of your life a little bit more intricately. I like that. So I just really think a guest at a time, a week at a time. But future of the podcast, I think it'd be cool to have like an independent school type podcast, because you can learn so much about teachers and coaches and stories and administrators. And I think that's why it'll be cool to talk to different heads of school from around the country. So I'd love to have like the independent school podcast, where if you want to learn about the greatest teachers at independent schools, you go on to episode with, Mr. So-and-so from Andover, or Mr. So-and-so from, Roland Park,
Sure.
or Miss Vasquez for Gilman, or whoever. Right?
The most important person to bring on the podcast is always Miss Vasquez.
Yeah, right. I think that'd be really cool, the independent school podcast. But I love keeping it Gilman centric, but also expanding outside of Gilman.
Yeah, I think that a lot of what's great about the podcast is that anyone can get like a really good sense of what Gilman is like through even just a couple episodes of this. But there's also a risk, I think, where if you're drawing just from Gilman, you're not talking about new things eventually. And if you want to have deep conversations, it's important to expand your horizons and bring new ideas into the community. So that's why I really like when you bring on people from other places. I really liked the one with Michael Katz, for instance, and talking about Crime and Punishment and that school that he was teaching at, where you immerse into other languages.
Yeah, thank you.
Wonderful podcast.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I like how you're such a big fan of the podcast. Because
I'm the number one fan. That's what I said.
I believe that. I think that's very true, because I even talked to my dad. He sits at home and he watches some of them. He's like, I could make it through like 20 minutes of that one and then something more entertaining, because it is, it's a lot of conversation about the deep dive into the person, which, I don't know, some people don't love podcast episodes, but I like that you stay on it. So I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Anything that you would recommend for the podcast, just from your vantage point, in terms of bettering it, growing it, making it more interesting to listen to?
I'm really not sure. I think that I do like the idea of drawing from other people. I think that podcasts are nice because, especially an interviewer like, there's different people with different types of podcasts, but you're very much an interviewer that lets the guest speak and, say what they need to say. And I think that the more you can get people who are very, who are experts in something and very, know a lot about something and can dive deep, I think that's a huge positive.
Right.
And I think that the podcasts I like the most are usually those. Mr. Slutkin can talk a lot about Lincoln.
Yeah.
And you really get into that. Mr. Guline talks a lot about his experience as a teacher, and I would say he's an expert in that.
Mm-hmm.
Michael Katz talking about translation and Russian. Like, no matter what the subject is, I think people who are very interested and very passionate and very knowledgeable is what I think is best to bring on, in my opinion.
That's a good point.
You've done a good job of that, but yeah, that would be my focus if I were in your position.
That's a really good point, because that's partly why I was asking you about like 3 things that you feel like you could talk a lot about, because sometimes I feel like, Pat the Follower, we're kind of meandering through the life's journey, which is great, and that's kind of the blueprint of the podcast, but I think starting with specific things that you are really passionate about, that you love talking about, like Chicago, like you get excited visibly when I brought that up at the beginning.
Yes.
And I think that's important, not only for making you feel comfortable at the beginning of the episode, because it's kind of nerve-wracking if you've never put the headphones on and done a podcast before.
Get used to hearing your own breathing every 2 seconds.
Right.
But a little strange experience, yeah.
Then you hear something that gets you excited, and you forget all about that.
Tunnel vision. Nothing else matters,
Yeah. And I also think it helps differentiate. Like if all these podcasts were about talking
definitely.
about Gilman School, which a lot of them are, but I think it helps diversify the conversational topic a little bit.
Yeah, and then that's interesting too, is that, you bring all these different people. When you bring on it's strange, but when you bring on a diverse group of people with diverse interests and things to say, the commonalities are then more important. Because, if you bring on only Gilman people and they always talk about Gilman, whatever. But if you bring on people from all different walks of life and they all have like some theme of integrity or honor or something like that, then that means something more, I think, at least.
Yeah. All right, Jeffrey, we're getting to the end here. Anything else that we didn't get to today that you want to talk about?
I'm comfortable with what we talked about today.
I do want to read one poem for you about Chicago, and I just kind of, I put together a bunch on here. Gwendolyn Brooks, who's a favorite because of this book that you gave me, and I've been really enjoying that. We can read the one about Chicago, or we can read The Learned Astronomer.
Oh, I like the Astronomer.
All right, let's do that one.
Fans of Breaking Bad will recognize this poem too.
Yeah, I forgot about that. All right, so I'll read this one. It's called When I Heard the Learned Astronomer, Walt Whitman. When I heard the learned astronomer, when the proofs, the figures were ranged in columns before me, when I was shown the charts and diagrams to add, divide, and measure them, when I sitting heard the astronomer where he lectured with much applause in the lecture room, how soon unaccountable I became tired and sick, till rising and gliding out I wandered off by myself in the mystical moist night air, and from time to time looked up in perfect silence at the stars. That's a great one.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, it reminds me a lot of you because, you've got this deep fascination with math and equations and, carrying the textbook around just because of the love of the game, but also the things that math and science can't explain, and things that you still marvel at in nature or, mystically, that can move you outside of things that are explainable or, you can research or look up on a computer or in a textbook.
And what I love about this poem is that it kind of shows how, like, if you are really interested in something, it doesn't always mean that you have to, dive into the most technical level of it. If you're really into neurobiology or something, you don't need to go get a degree in neuroscience to, understand some more interesting stuff. Because in a lot of ways, when you go too deep, you start to hyper specialize, and you start to lose the big picture. And I think that just taking a step back is, for some people probably where more of the enjoyment comes from and where you'll have a better time in your life, I think. And that's a lot of like what I was talking about earlier with the liberal arts education is that, pigeonholing yourself into one thing is not going to be a good way to, develop as a student, but also just live a fulfilling life.
Yeah. And to gain like a broad appreciation for things. And then you can always dive into a specific when you go professional in something, but just in general, I like this poem because it gives you a good perspective on just the world. All right, Jeffrey, thank you so much for for coming in today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Great episode.